Hello, my friends. This is Deepak again, and with a friend, Harish Christopher Wallace. He's an expert, I would say, in uh, Kashmir Shaivism, Vedanta, just everything that we need to understand on non-dual reality. And his two books are quite amazing. I've mentioned them before. Sutras illuminating a 1,000-year-old spiritual masterpiece, and of course, Tantra Illuminated. I've been reading these books for a while, and every time I reread them, I get more out of them. And so, first of all, thank you, Harish, for joining.
Thank you. And if I could just take a moment to hold up the paperback copy of the book, just because if you look on Amazon or whatever, it doesn't look like the one you have, which is a collector's edition. This is the paperback copy, just so people can recognize it if they're interested. No pressure.
Yeah, and we can put a picture of the book also in this link when people come to listen to this conversation. So I thought, Harish, this is very exhaustive knowledge, and as you said, even a single sutra can be understood in so many ways. So I'd like to stay on chapter 1 for a while, to digest these ideas, and I'll actually also make them practical in terms of how they affect our day-to-day experience of the world. So I'm going to read from chapter 1, the first sutra. And here's what Harish says. Here's chapter 1. And he says, before each sutra, Khemaraja, however you want to pronounce him, Khemaraj, writes a short introduction explaining its purpose and how it connects to the previous sutra. So I'm now reading the sutra itself, which says, Vishwa Siddhi Hetam, awareness free and independent, is the cause of the performance of everything. I understand by that statement that what we call I am is the divine cause of all experience that we call existence. Fair enough? Okay, so Harish, now we have Shiva Sutra 1 alternative translation in the book. How about let's go through each one of these right now, and then I will have some questions as well.
Yeah, and just for those following along at home, this is page 44 of the print book.
Correct. So let's go one by one. Awareness needing nothing outside itself is the cause and manifestation of all things, including this Zoom conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So awareness is defined as the power by which we have any experience whatsoever. So that's kind of an important thing here, that in this spiritual tradition, awareness is understood to be a Shakti, and Shakti means a power or energy. It can also mean a goddess, but awareness is specifically, this word chitti in Sanskrit is impossible to translate quite right in English, because it's the power to be aware, the power by which we are aware, the power by which we experience anything whatsoever. And it has these two aspects. One is manifestation, or apparent manifestation, if you prefer to call it that. And the other is the timeless, formless ground of being, what we might call the field of absolute potential. And these are the two aspects of awareness, which are also discussed in Sutra number 2. So the teaching is that when you go into deep meditation, and you can have this experience spontaneously or through intensive practice, but when you go into deep meditation, you experience this kind of extraordinary quiet presence. It's not dramatic, and yet it's extraordinary. This timeless, formless ground of being is also called spacious awareness that's is completely free of any contraction or any conceptualization or any objectification. And what you discover, this tradition promises, is that this formless ground of being that you contact in the deepest states of meditation is your transcendental nature. And it's the transcendental nature of all existence, that in fact, it's not just yours, it's literally trans-individual, the ground of all being. And that this formless awareness, which we can also simply call quiet presence, manifests as all form, right? So it doesn't need anything other than itself in order to do this, meaning there's nothing but consciousness according to this view and according to this mode of experience. It's not just a philosophy, right? There's nothing but consciousness. Consciousness is everything, and everything is consciousness, using the terms consciousness and awareness interchangeably here. So awareness needing nothing outside itself is the cause of the manifestation of all phenomena, all qualia of experience, absolutely everything. And I'd just like to address a common objection to this, which is traditional in Indian philosophy, by the way, that you try to anticipate the objections that people might have and address them. And so, of course, people who are vested in the physicalist model or materialist model, they say, oh, it's easy to refute your philosophy because the earth existed before there were conscious observers to observe it. And the universe existed before there were conscious observers to observe it. To which we say the following: we hold to a more radical skepticism than you do. And by skepticism, we mean if we can't verify it in direct experience, it remains merely a hypothesis. We are committed to verification through direct experience. So we cannot verify through direct experience that there is a universe here before there were conscious observers to observe it. To which the objectioner says, but we can measure the light from distant stars and see that it's been traveling for 13.7 billion years. Therefore, we know the universe is that old. To which someone from our view responds, no, you don't know that. All you know is what appears within consciousness. So when you look at and study the universe, especially at great distances and depths, what you see is a 13.7 billion year old looking universe. The universe that appears within consciousness has the character, for those who bother to look like astronomers, it has the character of being 13.7 billion years old, but nothing requires us to believe that it actually is that. We cannot verify that through direct experience. We can only verify what appears within consciousness. To which the physicalist usually says, well, your skepticism is too radical. And we say, who's to judge what's too radical? We are those who want to base everything on what's verifiable through direct experience. And we say, you are clinging religiously to a hypothesis that you cannot verify. If that's what you want to do, fine. But you can't claim that your knowledge is on a sounder basis. So just to anticipate some of the objections that people might have to this consciousness-only view.
So, Rishi, let's just stay with this particular point for a moment, okay? We can go to the other points, but this is such an important point. It comes up all the time. I'm looking for my book, You Are the Universe, but it doesn't matter. In the book, I started by reporting, and I think we've mentioned this before, a conversation between Tagore and Einstein. Basically said there's the scientific view, there's the human view, and then Tagore responded by saying the scientist, so that of a human scientist. And Einstein then responded, then science is my religion. That is very good conversation that I happened to chance upon many years ago. It's become one of my favorite conversations to read, because what is pointed to by Tagore is the difference between scientism and what we call science. Science being a methodology, observation, experiment, verification, all of course occurring in awareness. Where else would any activity occur, including the experience of doing science? But scientism, and actually, in a way, Einstein, religion, scientism is an ideology which says the scientific method can give us answers to everything, including what is the nature of fundamental reality. And that has now become a topic of big debate, even amongst cognitive scientists and those who study the brain, which said even the brain is an experience in consciousness. Where else could it be experienced? The brain is a human construct. But going to where you are saying about radical skepticism and the direct method, can we not say, and I'm asking you this, can we not say that the universe is the physical body of this non-local awareness, but it assumes different forms depending on the species of consciousness experiencing it? So what we experience is the Big Bang, or what we come out, this theory about the Big Bang, purely human construct. And even perceptually, what we see is a human experience. It's not the experience of an insect with 100 eyes, or a bat that knows the world through a chameleon whose eyeballs swivel on two different axes. So there is actually no one appearance of the world. The appearance, the universe appears in innumerable form, in innumerable species of consciousness. If we consider ourselves, Homo sapiens, as a particular species of consciousness, then this is the Jagat Mithya that we're experiencing. But it's not absolute at all. This universe that we're experiencing, and we're only experiencing it in the present moment, or not even the moment, but in the presence of presence, which is timeless. And even in that timeless presence, it's changing its appearance in the same way as my body and my brain is changing. So my body, my brain, and the universe go together as a single experience. And if we understand consciousness is that in which all experience occurs, that in which all experience is known, out of which all experience is made, then Brahman and Brahman makes total sense. You know, Brahman is the universal consciousness, and Brahman is its innumerable consciousness that this non-local universal awareness is differentiates. Is that making any sense to you?
Yeah, I think one way to explain this to those to whom it doesn't make sense is to do so on the basis of metaphor, and then we can clarify what's actually being pointed at. So, for example, virtually all light on Earth comes from the sun, even, of course, electric light, right? Because we obtain electricity by burning coal and other methods, but all those methods have to do with the extraction of energy originally coming from the sun. So this energy gets stored in coal and oil and natural gas, and in also in other sort of substrates like rivers, right? Because rivers are only full of energy because of evaporation caused by the sun, which becomes clouds, which rains down as rain and fills the rivers, right? So every energy source that we can tap into is indirectly solar energy. So if you're reading by the light of an electric lamp, you're reading by the light of the sun. It's just indirect, right? It's delayed and it's indirect. And so in the same way, all consciousness, there's only one consciousness, the argument here goes, there's one consciousness, and all conscious creatures are participating in it to whatever degree they can. And of course, a tiny little bug or something, it has a very different and much smaller world than the world that we can access. It has, to be more specific, a different Umwelt, where that refers to the range of conscious experiences available to that creature. So the argument here, which again is not going to be accepted on purely rational grounds, you must have direct experience of this through spiritual practice to really become convinced. But the argument is that one consciousness is operating through countless different creatures, and all those creatures are partaking of the one consciousness, the one field of consciousness. They're participating in it at varying degrees. And of course, there could be beings that we're perhaps even unaware of that have a bigger Umwelt than we do, meaning to say there could be conscious creatures who can perceive more of the universe than we do, perceive more of the visible, of the spectrum of light, right? For us, the spectrum, the visible spectrum of light is tiny, and there may be creatures that can see much more of the spectrum of light, or creatures who can perceive dimensions even that we can't perceive. And so we shouldn't imagine that we are at the top of the kind of consciousness ladder necessarily, but we do have quite a big Umwelt. And also we have this unique capacity for self-reflection called vimarsha in Sanskrit, by virtue of which we can extend our senses. This is an extraordinary thing that, as far as we know, no other animal does. We extend our senses by building tools like telescopes and so on that give us a bigger Umwelt, a bigger range of perception than we have without our tools. So, but still, no matter what we perceive, it's just the one consciousness looking through our eyes. And I'll get a little bit less philosophical and more experiential here. I'll invite you and the viewers to just become aware of that which is looking through your eyes. That which is looking through your eyes is awareness, presence, but it's not mind, because it's looking through the mind. Your vision might even be filtered or affected by your mental state, but there's something deeper than your mental state, which is looking through this body-mind and perceiving whatever there is to perceive. And the thing to notice here in your direct experience is that body-mind can seem to color consciousness, but there's always a deeper clarity. For example, if you're confused, if your mind is confused, well, consciousness is perfectly clear that confusion is present. Or if your body is sleepy, consciousness is awake to the fact that the body is sleepy. And in this way, you can discover that what you fundamentally are, this awareness presence, is also unwoundable, right? Whatever fears or concerns or wounds or anxiety or trauma exists in the body mind, the deeper consciousness is untouched by them, which is why it's so important for people to access it and discover, oh, there's a part of me, the deepest part of me is always already completely okay and more than okay. And so that really changes the way you can look at yourself when you're considering, I have this problem or that problem. And you're like, oh, actually, my body mind might have issues, but that which knows that there is a body mind is completely free of those issues. And that's a great solace. And that's why we practice. That's why this is worth it. And you can't attain this realization merely through philosophizing.
So let me respond to what you've said. Actually reminded me of a beautiful poem of William Blake, where he says, we are led to believe a lie when we see and not through the eye that was born in the night to perish in the night, while the soul slept in beams of the said just now. That consciousness looks through the body mind, looks through the eyes. So my teacher Maharishi Mahesh Yogi used to use these three words, Rishi, Devata, and Chandas. And then he would say Rishi, Devata, and Chandas. The samhita of Rishi, Devata, and Chandas is pure consciousness, where Rishi is the seer, Devata is the divine act of seeing, and that which is seen. And so, as pure consciousness vibrates, or Shakti or Vritti or whatever we want to call it, then it differentiates into the seer, the seeing, and the scenery. But it is only the seeing that generates both the seer and the scenery in every act of seeing or every act of perception. There's a new seer and a new scenery. What do you say to that?
Yeah. So, well, there's several things going on there. This reference to Rishi, Devata, and Chandas has to do with all the tantric scriptures. They declare at the beginning of the scripture, or the beginning of the hymn, because sometimes it's a hymn, Hymn, that there's this seer, there's this Devata, and there's this Chandas. So depending on how you interpret it, I mean, the seer can mean the author of that hymn, but as you say, esoterically, it means the one who is seeing, right? And the Devata is the divinity that the text or hymn or scripture is focused on, right? So it's what you're trying to attain. We talk about trying to attain God, right? Of course, non-dualistically, you're invited to recognize that the seer and the goal of seeing, the deity, are in fact one, that the secret here that's hidden in plain sight is that the one you are looking for is in fact the one who is looking. And there needs to be this discovery of that, and the chandas is the structure, right? Because chandas literally means meter. It's the meter of the text or the mantra or the hymn in question, but it's also the structure, the rhythm by which you are exploring consciousness in the form of a given scripture or in the form of a repeated practice, a rhythmically repeated practice, So there's layers and layers of interpretation possible here. But I think one thing you said is key, which is that this trifurcation into seer, seeing, and seen is actually a trifurcation that happens in the mind, right? That the underlying reality is that there's just one. There's a consciousness event we call seeing or hearing or whatever it is. And then we construct language that says, oh, I see something, when in fact, there's only one happening. And we're so used to having our experience structured by language that we take it literally. We think there's a difference between me and that which I'm seeing because language gives me that difference. Language suggests that difference, and it's very structured. I see something. But if we actually take a moment and look at it, seeing is simply a consciousness event. And we have to imagine a separate seer in order to believe in it. But there is no separate seer. There's just seeing. Check this in your own experience, everyone, please. You need to see for yourself that there's no seer separate from the seeing, and there's no seen separate from the seeing. And therefore, there is literally only one in every moment, consciousness manifesting in a particular way. Is that what you were hinting towards, or did I just go on a tangent?
I was hinting towards it, but you clarified it. So here's another analogy. People ask, so if it's all one, why do I see so different things? And if electricity is one, right now, we are using the electrical grid of the universe for this conversation, but it's powering my computer, my iPhone, the light bulb, and everything else in the city. And they're all different. They're all giving us different experiences of the one electricity. Would that be a good analogy?
Absolutely. And we should also invoke the analogy of dreaming, because it's funny that people ask this question where they say, oh, but the world seems to be full of duality. And I'm like, well, don't your dreams seem to be full of duality? And yet, you're absolutely convinced already that all your dream is you. You are the dreamer. So everything you dream is your own consciousness. And yet there appears to be duality. And there you are running away from the bad guy in your dream, or trying to pursue something. And you're totally convinced by it. And then you wake up and you say, it was just a dream. Well, spiritual awakening is literally exactly the same, in the sense that when you awaken spiritually, you go, oh my gosh, it was just a dream that there's separation. My imagination of separation and duality was nothing but a dream. My imagination that there's stuff I need to chase after to be happy, right? Or, a grab onto or avoid. That was also imagination, because there's nothing here but what I am. And I can relax into essence nature in every moment, because there's nothing but what I am. So I get to just enjoy it instead of running around all the time like a chicken with my head cut off, So this is such a powerful, this is why we have the analogy of waking up. Spiritual awakening is based on the waking up from a dream. It's a metaphor that's very, very powerful, and that's why spiritual awakening eliminates fear, because when you wake up from a dream, you're no longer afraid of whatever was scaring you in the dream. Well, in the same way, when you have a spiritual awakening, you literally see that there's nothing to fear. It's not a concept. You see that there's nothing to fear, and that what you thought was real is not real in the way you thought it was, right? Because what you are fundamentally is unborn and undying. And so even physical death holds no fear, because what you are cannot die. And if you see that in direct experience, then it's liberating, because almost most fears boil down to the fear of annihilation or death. And if that's impossible, well, that's very liberating,
Rishi, you're taking us down the rabbit hole, so let's go a little bit
Okay.
even deeper. So right now, as I speak these words, and people listen to them and you listen to them, by the time you hear these words, they don't exist. When you look at this and you look at me, by the time that perceptual snapshot is registered in your consciousness, it doesn't exist. That particular snapshot doesn't exist. So every experience that we have has already happened. Every experience that we have has already happened. In one case, right now, the example I'm giving, the experience occurred perhaps a nanosecond ago, but it has already happened. And then when we talk about the Big Bang 13.7 years ago, we extend that to it happened 13.7 billion years ago. Now, let me take this a little further. It doesn't matter the time scale, right? 1 nanosecond or 13.7 billion years in human time. It
Right.
doesn't matter. The principle is the same. We are experiencing only the past. We are only experiencing the past in the presence of timeless now. In the presence of timeless now, we are only experiencing the past. But as soon as we experience it, then time is also generated. So the present moment is in time, but presence is not in time. But the bigger elaboration here is what is karma all the time, because it's already happened. And you're interpreting what's already happened. Doesn't matter happened a nanosecond ago or 13.7 billion years ago. What you're experiencing is always, this moment is karma for you, for me, and for everyone. This present moment in time is karma. And what you're saying is, if we get to the source of all experience, in which all experience is happening, which is the presence, which is not in time at all, then in the moment, not in the moment, but in the presence of presence, we are already liberated from karma.
I like that argument. I think that's a very, very good argument indeed. And I also want to add to it by saying, if you keep trying to make sense of what's happening with your mind, then you're even more in the past, right? The way one way to experience presence, as you're talking about, and absolutely correct, I would say that presence is outside of time and space, right? Presence is beyond time and space. It contains time and space as some of the possibilities for perception. And the way to access presence, one way is to relax out of the compulsive trying to figure out, trying to parse and explain and interpret and understand, which is perfectly appropriate in some other context, right? If you're at work or whatever, you're trying to solve a problem, yeah, think it through. The mind is an amazing tool. But when we're talking about meditative practice, it's important to release the mind's compulsive attempt to make sense of, to parse, to interpret experience, because then we're already lagging way behind. Whereas if you just radically open to the whole of your experience in this moment, and it's sort of like listening, but not just with your physical ears, you're listening to the entirety of your experience with every cell of your body and all your senses simultaneously, then you slip into that very presence. Because you're not playing catch up anymore. You're just experiencing the qualia of consciousness, the various ways that consciousness appears, washing through, flowing through consciousness. And I say flowing because everything's always moving, even when it appears to be static. It's vibrating, it's flowing, it's moving, it's pulsing, you know, and everything, you actually directly see the aliveness of everything. Because if you're trying to understand it with your mind, you don't see the aliveness of everything. You miss it. You're covering it over with concepts. You know, would you agree with that?
I would agree, but some of us are neurotic like I am. And I try to figure out things through the mind. And so what then is Jnan Yoga? And I get Bhakti Yoga, simple. Okay, Karma Yoga, simple. Raj Yoga, simple. But then you come to this Jnan Yoga. What is this? The Upanishads say that it's a treacherous path. It's like the razor's edge, because the more you use the mind to go beyond the mind, the more screwed you get, in a way. You get bamboozled by all these constructs and you don't know what to do. So what is the role of Jnan Yoga? Is it just to get rid of pragya aparad, as they call it, the mistake of the intellect?
Yeah, in a way, yeah, because this is the common misunderstanding, is that Jnana Yoga, depending on how you pronounce it in different Indian languages, right? This yoga of wisdom or yoga of insight gets misinterpreted to be the way of kind of philosophy, or the way of like trying to think your way to enlightenment, which of course it's not. And we can see very clearly just by looking at primary sources like the Bhagavad Gita, which of course teaches many different yogas, and amongst them, the three most famous yogas it teaches, as you say, is a Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga. It teaches others as well. But if you look at chapter 4, for example, of the Bhagavad Gita and some other verses in the text, you see it defines Jnana Yoga as not theorizing, not philosophizing, not intellectualizing, but cultivating insight into the fact that your sense of ownership is merely a mental construct, and that therefore you let go of your attachment to the outcome of your actions, because it was never yours to begin with. There is no such thing as ownership except in the mind. And having this insight, you become free of karma, because your action is no longer motivated by the desire to try to force a particular result to occur. And if you're no longer doing that, if you're just acting freely and spontaneously, moved by life energy, letting it move through you. There's no karma possible, because karma is motivated action and its consequences, its repercussions. So you're free of these motives of trying to control, and you still have motive, of course. We wouldn't act without motive, but the motive is not trying to control the outcome of experience. It's a welling up from within. For example, whether it's compassion, whether it's the desire to connect, whether it's the desire to experience or give or receive. These are intrinsic motivations, not extrinsic ones. So when we act as a spontaneous expression of these intrinsic motivations, we're acting with wisdom, with insight, according to the Gita. So the jnani, in this sense, is somebody who has deep insight. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily intellectual about it. In fact, a person of great wisdom or insight in this tradition might not be able to explain it with words, but because that's a secondary thing, right? And so that's absolutely crucial to understand. And lastly, because this is commonly misunderstood, people think the Gita teaches different paths for different people, like the path of bhakti for some, the path of karma yoga for others, and so on. No, but we can't forget all the yogas of the Gita are taught to Arjuna, right? They're all taught to one person, not to many different people. So actually, we weave these yogas together. We might emphasize one more than another, but we weave them together in this magnificent tapestry of spiritual practice.
My own, I've kind of struggled with Jnan Yoga a lot. Your insights are very valuable. But in the end, I did realize that the key is Ishwar Pranidhana, as they say. You just surrender to not knowing, to the mystery, because it's unsolvable intellectually, totally unsolvable. So let me ask you one more question. We didn't even have time to go into these beautiful insights.
That's okay. We can make 50 more videos.
Yeah, we can do this forever. But let me ask you this last question, and we'll do a little bit of summary. But my last question is there ever an embodied observer? Is there ever an embodied observer? I think, if you go inside my body, there's no observer there. In fact, my body is being observed by whatever the observer is and wherever this observer is. The body is an experience in the observer. The mind is an experience in the observer. What we call the world is the vritti is also in the observer. So actually, all these arguments, what happened before the Big Bang or what happened, has been just that one observer, and past, present, and future are just mental constructs. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now, and this is very interesting to me because, I kind of traverse two worlds. One is yours, but there's another world that I traverse. And, talking to these guys, Nobel laureates and Harvard astrophysicists. So I just interviewed from this guy, Avi Loeb, who's brilliant, absolutely. And what he is proposing that, there was this that was discovered a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, which seems to be a highly advanced technology object from another galaxy or another system that astronomers have now observed, which could be an object developed by an advanced civilization maybe 100,000 years ahead of us, because the technology seems advanced. Okay. Now, of course, if we go to Einstein's theories, and especially not the general relativity, but special relativity, then, past, present, future, it depends on the speed of the observer and the look of the observer. But they're all talking about embodied observers. Einstein was riding a beam of light. And then he had this epiphany about the relativity of time, that some things are in the future for you and me, but they're in the past for somebody in another location somewhere in a galaxy. Recently, I also interviewed this Caltech professor who's favoring the multiverse theories, which he says, according to current mathematics and string theories and many other theories, there may be infinite universes and infinite versions of you and me also, or very infinite universes. And that's becoming very popular with string theory, etc. When I read the Yoga Vashishta, Vashishta says infinite universes come and go in the vast expanse of consciousness, like motes of dust shining in a beam of light that's coming through my roof. Amazing metaphor, these infinite universes bouncing off in a beam of light. So the lokas, the infinite lokas that the Buddhists talk about, or the Vedanta sometimes talks about, at least Yoga Vashishta talks about, they're not locations in space-time. They're frequency domains of consciousness. And so once we think of consciousness, if we are infinite beings, are there infinite lokas?
I don't know, but you did, for me, you broke up a little bit there. So I didn't catch everything, but if the question is, are there infinite lokas? That's above my pay grade, Deepak ji.
But as sentient beings, are we in it? Is there ever an embodied observer? Can you find an embodied? The observer is formless, right? So formless means infinite. This in conversation being processed right now in non-local domain or not? I think there's nothing that is not being processed non-locally, that the local experience is, as you just said, a dream.
Yeah, well, this is important because some teachings can only approximate the nature of reality, and how we approximate them, how we approximate reality can end up having serious pragmatic consequences. So the tantric tradition is very, very interested in embodiment because they saw that for their compatriots in Advaita Vedanta and Patanjali Yoga, that these folks were getting dissociated, right? So these guys were doing all this witness consciousness meditation and detachment and dispassion and renounce the world and attain a transcendental higher state of consciousness. And the tantrikas were like a reaction against that in a certain way, where they said, well, there seems to be a problem here because this world is a real manifestation of consciousness. It's, of course, an illusion from the point of view of the materialist philosophy, but it's a real manifestation of consciousness, and it wouldn't exist if we were just supposed to renounce it, So we are leaning towards this other possibility in tantric practice, which is becoming completely free of identification with the body mind, but simultaneously willing to be intimate with the body mind and intimate with all the features of the manifest world. So in a sense, there's a strong tension within the spiritual traditions of India on this very point. And so we say, for pragmatic reasons, we want to be careful not to teach in ways that actually invite dissociation. And in this modern world, it's all the more important because a lot of people are sort of traumatized by modern living, and the easiest thing to do is dissociate, escape, step back, become disconnected, And Tantra teaches us how to connect to our deepest, innermost reality, and on the basis of that connection, step forward and engage with the world more intimately. So a tantric yogi then is said to be one who knows he or she is not the body and not the mind, but is intimately engaged with them just like intimately engaged with the whole world. You know, of course, you could also say, you are this body and mind in the same way that you are the sky and the earth and the trees, right? But we see through bodies, consciousness sees through bodies, and therefore bodies call for our engagement. They call for our care and attention. And sadly, I have known many non-dualists who are more of the illusionist camp, who then neglect what we might call ethics or interpersonal boundaries or things like that that the tantrika seeks to learn how to honor, because he or she seeks to learn how to dance with the manifestations of consciousness in the most graceful way possible.
Very well answered.
So I don't know if that answered your question.
It did.
Okay.
It did, but there's an issue here which is very practical. Okay, I'm a medical doctor. My training is in internal medicine, endocrinology, neuroscience, brain science. So I'm obsessed with the nature of the body and the mind and genes and all of that. And, I'm kind of in that world. It was my training. But at a certain point, and having met some interesting people, I met Lakshman Ju once through Maharishi. I knew of Tatwale Baba, although I never met him. And I got very interested in, the yogic tradition and even the tantric traditions of what we call understanding the body as consciousness, not as matter, which is, anatomy, first day in medical school, anatomy. So you only think of the body as matter. Then you go to physiology. Now you're studying the body as an activity, as a verb, noun, and then there's biochemistry, genetics, etc. And the models in science for the body, it's matter. Okay, now we go a little bit deeper, it's energy. Go a little bit deeper, it's information. But go a little bit deeper, it's consciousness, which everybody agrees, at least in our traditions, you and I agreeing that everything is, including my iPhone, is made of consciousness. But my body particularly, if I forsake the idea that it's matter, energy, and information, that its fundamental nature is formless consciousness, and this is the appearance of that formless consciousness, then theoretically, and I'm obsessed with this, you should be able to morph your formless being into the appearance of any form as a human body, any form as a human body, not as a body of a mosquito or a tree, but within the constructs, confines of the human body, able to choose the appearance of this body. So I've been obsessed with this since 30 years. I'm 74, I'm going to be 75. Right now, my biological markers in their 30s, my intention, my sankalp is to maintain this and even better than it is now and die in Mahasamadhi, as I think would be the most, but I cannot do that if I believe in these mental constructs of matter, energy, and information. I can only do that if I experience my body as formless. The only thing I experience all the time is my internal dialogue, and my internal dialogue is projecting as this karmic body. But if I can experience my body as formless, which is part of my practice, yoga nidra and all these amazing practices, visceroception, if I can experience, close my eyes, experience no sensation, then I'm going a little bit beyond the karmic body into what we call the bliss body, or the, Buddhists call the rainbow body, etc. Is there any basis to think like this?
Oh, of course. Yeah, this is very much how the tradition thinks and how it explains the manifestation of things like siddhis. But here's the interesting little nuance I want to add to your thinking here, which is any desire which is fundamentally based in ego will not necessarily be manifestable unless there's just a coincidence that your ego desire happens to also be a part of what life energy wants. You know, just to give a simple example, you have the body of a much younger man, but no matter how much you focus on it and want it, you can't magically make your hair turn dark black again overnight. You know, you can dye it, but you can't do it with the power of your consciousness. And therefore, you have to humbly conclude this must be an ego desire. Because if it was not an ego desire, if it was aligned with life energy, I could do it. I could make my hair black just with the power of my consciousness. What do you think of that?
So here's something. So I've studied this because, you know, I was also introduced to Ayurvedic tantric masters. So Panchakarma, 1 week of Panchakarma with meditation increases telomerase levels by 40%. It doesn't change the color of your hair. But there's something else called Kaya Kalpa, which these guys do. And, you know, where you go into a cave for 6 months or a year and you fast and you do all of these practices. And theoretically, your hair is black, you have new teeth and you have a new body. Now that's part of the, what do you call it, or mythical thinking. But, you know, I used to think a lot of things were myths in Ayurveda. I never believed it till I saw these results. And you're right, it's the ego mind that actually wants these desires. But even the Upanishads say you are what your deepest desire is. As is your desire, so is your intention. As is your intention, as is your will, so is your deed. As is your deed, so is
Yes.
your death. Understanding consciousness and then surrendering Ishwar Pranidhana could be a key to a different form of expression of consciousness, which we're not seeing in Kali Yuga.
Yeah. And I would say that the liberated being never experiences disappointment of desires, because if you feel an impulse to go for something or create something or do something and it doesn't happen, you know, that was not aligned with the pattern of life energy, and I want what life wants. So why would I be disappointed? Because I know that what life wants is always, it's part of a deeper pattern, which itself is intrinsically right, for lack of a better word. So I can actually celebrate it when I don't get what I want, because I know that life knows better, and I celebrate that it always gets its way.
And that which is wanting is an illusion to begin with. That which is doing the wanting, right? Because existence takes care of itself.
It absolutely does.
So my very special guest has been Harish, and we didn't get to discussing even one sutra in detail, but that gives us the opportunity over and over again so that we can continue learning from this amazing master of non-dual reality, the author of the Recognition Sutras and also Tantra Illuminated. Thank you so much, Harish, for illuminating us once again today.
Thank you.